Eric.
Eric?
Okay. So last time we were just both awkwardly silent because no one said Eric. This time we both said Eric, and we both responded to Eric with Eric. I don't know what it should be or what it will be for our intro, but that's not it. I don't think.
No. We need some kind of update to our nomenclature, some new naming conventions.
I guess I could say Trexler, and then you could say Helms.
Oh yeah, we do have multiple names. Yeah,
that's true. Okay, we'll workshop it. We'll see what the other people on obelisks, pyramids, and second tier levels of the pyramids think, and we'll get back to you. But folks, that'll be the definitely the last time we mess up that intro. You deserve better, but it's okay. Don't worry. I'm just as much at fault.
I'll put together a public apology letter and post it. Tweet out like a screenshot of my notes app. I'll work on it.
That's the type of thing that looks sincere and like you really put the time into it. I think that's a good model. Well, hey, I just got off a plane. Thank you. I've had enough coffee to be pulling it off, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just got off a plane. It was a 12-hour flight from San Francisco to Auckland after a 2-hour flight from Seattle, where WNBF Worlds was, where I just had the privilege and pleasure of hanging out for a while. I got there on this is on, let's see, Monday the 20, if it's recording on the 23rd for me, it'll be coming out Monday the 24th, 5th, 6th, 27th. So that means it would have been back on Friday. Why don't I just open a Google thing instead of counting days? So yeah, I got there on the 17th of November, and WNBF Worlds this year, big comp. That's the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation, for those who aren't paying attention. This is their premier event, and so got there on Friday, and had to pretty much go right from the airport to get my weigh-ins and check-ins, athlete meeting, and then my base coat of my tan. And then it was a 2-day comp, because this was World's getting big. There's over 50 international affiliates now. So I think it probably has the most international representation of any natural bodybuilding organization at this point.
So did you have to compete across 2 days, or do they separate it out?
Good question. So you don't have to, but some people can. So day 1 is amateurs, and then day 2 is pros.
Okay.
But here's the cool thing about Worlds when it's a 2-day format like that. You can win your pro card at Worlds, which means you can do your pro debut the next day. There are a few other instances where you can compete on both days without actually getting your pro card on the first day. And that is in the instance where you're doing a pro division that you have a pro card in, but you're doing an amateur division where you're trying to get another pro card in.
Yeah.
So like in the IFBB, I think it's kind of interesting that technically your pro card is your pro card across all divisions. So if you are a bikini pro in the IFBB, you could be like, you know what? I'm jumping in bodybuilding. I don't care. Let's go.
Wow.
So that's not true of the WNBF. Their pro cards are specific to the category they were won in. So we'll take another one of these alternative universes where at the Australia show, I didn't win my open pro card, but I did win my Masters pro card only. Then I could have the option of competing in the Masters pro bodybuilding on Sunday, and then I could try in the open on Saturday. And that was actually my plan if I hadn't gotten it. And I could try again to get the pro card. And then
I just want to say, as a two-sport professional athlete, I find it offensive that the IFBB acts like you can just take your pro card from one category to another, because I feel like that just is so disrespectful to the simultaneous preps I did to earn a pro card in natural bodybuilding and also natural men's classic bodybuilding. Like, to me, the idea that I could have just prepped for one of those events instead of both simultaneously, it would have been a completely different prep for me. It would have been so much easier. But anyway, I'll take that up with the IFBB.
You still got your notes app open. I mean, that's just open another window.
G in one and then a rant in the other, an official call to action. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very versatile app.
Yeah.
You should check it out, see if you have it. If not, you can download it from the App Store. So folks, 2-day comp, potential opportunity to compete on both days. And the way it works is if there are 8 in a category for bodybuilding, figure, fit body, or maybe not fit body. I can't remember quite which ones. Men's physique. Basically, the more populated categories, if there's 8 or more, you can get your pro card on day 1. And if there are 8 or more per class, if it's that big of a category where they're actually splitting it up, each division class winner can get it. And then in the smaller categories, women's bodybuilding, I think you only need 5. Fit body, I can't quite remember. Masters only needs 5. In 40-plus category, you can also get your pro card. So there's a lot of opportunities where in a 2-day format, someone can get their pro card and then immediately compete as a pro, which is an attractive option because you get to see where you stand. And currently in the WNBF, there's a rule that you have to compete within 1 year of earning your pro card for the first time. And then it is a valid pro card for 2 years unless there's extenuating circumstances and you can apply for an extension.
Open up the app again. Third thing, I think they should change that to 2 years. I'll go ahead and put that post out there as well.
I actually think it should be just not have a time limit. I think the
well, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
yeah. I think there's enough competitors and it's big enough now, and especially with just the fact that people are typically competing on an every other year basis, and they're not all perfectly staggered. I don't think it would hurt numbers at all, and I think especially when you turn pro and you need time as an advanced lifter to put on some size. I don't think there's many people just sitting on the WNBF pro card and being like, yep, I retire. I think that's a good problem to have once we get there, because then that's what the IFBB has, right? Or just getting the pro card is so prestigious, they're like, all right, I'm good. I'm just going to be a well-marketed personal trainer.
Yeah.
But no, we're not short of competitors. Things are looking really good. The numbers were way up. I think to qualify for Worlds this year as an amateur, you had to place top 3 in a class of 5 or greater, or win classes of 3 or more, and you couldn't get a world qualification if there was only 2 in your category. And then that's in the U.S., and then every single international affiliate, of which there are 50 plus, they have different rules for how to qualify for Worlds, and they're sometimes quite stringent. Like you have to win, the whole damn thing, or win a regional show. So anyway, that's Worlds, folks. It was held at the Federal Way Performing Arts Center in. I think that's northern-ish Seattle, but don't quote me on that. Really great venue. Had a great experience. It really, it's not quite the same size or feel of IPF Worlds, which I've been to, which has become a legitimate, well-ran, multi-day, week-long sporting event with, multimedia companies and things like that. But I will say it felt more like Worlds back maybe, and say 2017, not quite, but close,
Yeah.
So I think IPF Worlds is maybe 100 plus international affiliates. So it's about half the size, which is something to say for how fractured natural bodybuilding is. WNBF is definitely leading the charge, and they've done a great job in recent years. I want to say they only had 22 or 23 international affiliates in 2014. So really rapid growth internationally in the last decade, and that's one of the things we're definitely doing right. So, yeah. I'm thinking, Eric, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time updating my personal journey about this because we've done that. But needless to say, I had the pleasure and privilege of competing in the Open Pro Middleweights on day 2, and that was awesome. There was a very competitive class of 9 there, and they only announce it if you place top 5. This is a big enough show where you get to find out down the track if you place out of the top 5, and I wasn't in the top 5. And just based on the movements, I think I was somewhere between 6 to 8. But I tell you what, dude, I was already felt like I'd won before I even got on stage. It was a privilege just to be there. So,
and I saw on Instagram, I certainly didn't like the post. Wouldn't do that kind of thing. But I did see that you mentioned that you felt like you really belonged on stage, which is, I think, a big win for your first pro show, especially doing your first pro show at Worlds. I mean, to be totally honest, the first pro show I did, the only pro show I've done so far, I did not quite feel like I belonged. So feeling like you belonged that's a big, definitely a big win, a personal PR, so to speak.
100%. Yeah, no, thank you so much, man. It was, cloud 9 isn't the appropriate cloud. There was many clouds beneath me that were more than single digit numbers. So it was a great experience on my end. It's also pretty cool. On Saturday, I was basically running around with Brandon. Shout out to Brandon. He's the one who does our audio. You think, oh, I thought the man just did audio. Oh, no. The man also does excellent photography, videography, editing. He's a musician. He sings. General smart guy, and he's got great hair. So Brandon has a lot of amazing character attributes, and I've had the I enjoy playing like director with Brandon, and I'm one of the directors who understands the artistry of the man behind the camera. I'm just kind of like, here's my vision, and I'll let you figure out how to do it. I'm not at all micromanaging because we've done like the lifting library and a lot of the bulk courses. But anyway, we got we sorted the media pass, and we were running around from back to front because our goal for a 3D muscle journey, because we were all there, all 5 coaches. We were there on Saturday. We had athletes across figure, fit body, bodybuilding, and men's physique competing on Saturday. And then we had athletes in all 3 of the pro men's bodybuilding categories on Sunday, including myself and Jeff. So it was a busy day for us. We had multiple lightweights. We had me in the middleweights, and then we also had heavyweight Evan Godby. So what we were doing was trying to get good footage of the coaches coaching, both in the back area, helping the athletes time their pump ups, taking a look at them, encouraging them on maybe what shots they'd hit during the pose down, all that kind of stuff. Just being a gopher sometimes. There's not a whole lot that goes into the game day coaching, especially except for keeping the competitor calm. Because honestly, a lot of the work that goes into what you look like is just staying anxiety-free on game day as much as you can, and the carb load should have been already done, and hopefully you got your color right, and then pumping up on time. And basically it's just telling people to pump up slower and later because the shows never go the way they want, and you're anxious, you got bands, what are you going to do? You're going to pump up. But we wanted to capture that. So, I was running Brandon back and forth, looking at my list of athletes and trying to capture all that. And then the next day I was on stage. And that was sort of unfortunate, although they did have some screens backstage so I could see what was going on. Because as a middleweight, I was following the open lightweights. And Jeff Alberts, in the best condition he's ever been in, he kept saying stuff like, I'm at my best at 52. And I was like, incorrect, Jeff. I've seen you at 38 all the way up till 51. This is your best ever, period. And I think he actually does believe that and knows it to be the case. But this is, I think, the best combination of leanness, fullness, peaking, posing, everything. So it was amazing to see Jeff at his peak, not just his peak for his age, competing in the lightweights at 52. And Eric, the lightweight pro men, we'll do the pros first. 16 competitors in that class.
Whoa.
Huge. And that might have been the most competitive lightweight class I've ever seen. And it was mostly full of people who are new. So to kind of spoil the plot here, we're just going to get right to it. Dirk Emmerich, he won. Dirk has already had an historic performance. So when he got his pro card, it was by winning the bantam title and the amateurs. The pros don't have bantams. They're just lumped into the lights. So that's an even smaller person, right, in terms of their body weight. He's not by any means small if you were to look at him. He won the bantams. And as I mentioned, then you go on to win the overall. And typically winning the overall at Worlds is really just for just saying you're a badass because you already got the pro card and there was enough. So you got his pro card winning the bantams. And this had never happened before. To my knowledge, there had never been a bantam to win the overall in the amateur WNBF Worlds until Dirk Emmerich. Dirk is from Germany, and he's been a 3DMJ athlete for a while, working with Berto. They have a great relationship. He's just a great guy, which is awesome. And that was his rookie season, too. So his first season out, not only does he get his pro card and win the bantam amateur, this is 2021, but he historically wins the overall.
Wow.
And now this year is his rookie pro season that he comes out of the gates, and he has won lightweight pro titles in Germany. He's competed in some of these kind of open events to multiple federations. So he competed in the Australian Natural Bodybuilding Federation Invitational, which was humongous, and he took second place there. And then he comes into Worlds, and he wins this 16-person lightweight class quite handedly, I would say. The top 5 are all amazing. There was gentlemen from all over Europe, and every one of those individuals in the top 5 you could make a case for as far as being, an elite pro. But I think Dirk was very clearly the winner. He brings a kind of conditioning that is just really, I think he's probably one of the leanest guys in bodybuilding right now, top to bottom, gnarly, muscular striated glutes, and just you could see everything. And he doesn't have to crush himself to get there. So it's never this question of, but is he going to be too flat, like we'd sometimes get with Brian Whitaker, who could be known to be dice, but would come in, maybe he pushed himself a little too hard. That's not a game that it seems like Dirk has to play. In his off season, he's got light glute striations. Is kind of who he is. And who's there in 5th place but Jeff Alberts?
Wow.
Oldest guy in the class by, I think, almost 10 years. I think that the next oldest gentleman was in his early to mid 40s. I want to say Stu McCullough. Shout out to him from the UK. But just an incredibly competitive lightweight class. I personally, completely unbiased, had Jeff a little higher. I thought he was going to be top 3. I think he was for one of the 2 rounds, either symmetry or muscularity. But there were some people who you'd be like, there's no way you're a lightweight. How could that be under 165 pounds the way you're shaped? But the conditioning standard is so high these days. So that was an incredible class. They had them posing on stage for 55 minutes.
Whoa. I'd be cramping up.
Many were. Jeff looked exactly the same from minute 1 to minute 55. And I do think that's probably part of the reason why he was in the top 5. He's a complete pro. And he truly is the greatest poser I've ever met in person, So that was
well known for being a really proficient poser.
100%.
Whenever people have asked me, like, hey, I want to learn how to pose, where should I go? I say, if you can book a posing consultation with Jeff Alberts, do that. Like that's the first, second, and third recommendation that I give.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and he's got it's going to get updated probably in the next year or 2. But we got the Godfather's Posing Guide, which is a great resource for bodybuilders on the vault. But anyway, so that was our winner in the men's lightweight bodybuilding. For the men's middleweight, I was in there, and this was a very clear 2-man race. I mean, there was some really good bodybuilders in there. Don't get me wrong. I'll start with 5th, 4th, and 3rd, just to kind of give them some credit, so it doesn't seem like it was just the top 2. But I think in terms of the judges, they had a really relatively clear positioning after the top 2. So in 5th was recently coming off his Mr. Universe win. That's Malcolm, who I met. Really great guy. He has won a couple of pro shows. He's got an awesome physique and really good dude. And he has just a really pleasing physique, both muscular but also very X-y and really thick from the side as well. So it's a good combination of a lot of things. So I think that was, he probably could have been in 4th or 5th. But I think that was probably where Malcolm should have been. Malcolm Cooper, by the way. So yeah, we got to meet. He is both won. He's basically a double Mr. Universe this year. He won the WNBF Pro Universe and also the IPE Pro Universe. So he's a very, very good competitor. This is someone who's won, pro shows and good pro shows, and he's coming in 5th in the middles to give you an idea of how competitive it is.
And just so I know, it's light, middle, heavy. Are those the 3 pro bodybuilding classes?
Correct. And there's slightly different cutoffs. So it's under 165 for the lights, and then it is under 185 for the middles, and then it's over 185 for the heavies. And then in the amateurs, they will break it into bantam, light, middles, light, heavy, and heavyweight. And it's slightly more spread apart, so it's over 190 to be a heavyweight in the amateurs.
Yeah.
And speaking of amateurs, the 4th place individual in the middleweights is a gentleman by the name of Doug King, who came from Cayman Islands. So really, really awesome physique. And he was not originally listed to be competing on day 2 because he was also the middleweight winner in the amateurs the day prior and the overall winner. So again, if you are someone who gets your pro card at Worlds, and even more so if you win the overall at Worlds, you're a problem in the pro ranks immediately. And that was exactly what was displayed there. I think the only thing holding him back from potentially cracking the top 3 or top 2 was bringing just like a higher standard of conditioning. But his shape and his muscularity, I mean, for the symmetry round, it was just so clear. And he was probably the least conditioned in that overall. Not to say he wasn't in good shape, but again, this is WNBF Worlds on day 1, Saturday, the amateurs. But it was just undeniable how symmetrical he was, and just how much he looked like kind of like a natural flex wheeler, you know? So very X-y and just very pleasing physique, and really no flaws in him.
Yeah.
So
there was a guy at a gym I interned at. I forget his last name. His first name was Trevor, but he basically, it was like a bodybuilding focused gym. It's called Beyond Limits in Columbus. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks know of it because it's become a place where if you're going to the Arnold Classic, a lot of natural folks like to go get a workout in there because it's a cool gym. I love Rich Loro, who's the guy who owns it and runs it.
I know Rich. Yeah, Rich and I way back in the day used to both be Controlled Lab sponsored athletes from like 2010 and prior.
Yeah. So Rich is a great guy.
Mr. Natural Ohio, I think, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, yeah, and he had the sneakiest physique. It was really it was crazy. Like. Super nice guy. It was great. He let me intern at his gym, which was a fantastic opportunity, and I got to train there when it's a great gym. But he had this kind of like non-assuming physique, or like you look at his physique and say, oh yeah, it looks like he's in good shape. But then he's in posing trunks. You go, holy crap! Look at those quads and the hamstrings and like the craziest V taper. And like he just hit it so well. Like he's one of those guys that you'd like look at him and be like, I think I could take Rich on stage. And then you see him on stage and you go, oh no, I cannot at all. Like it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like clothed to posing trunks. Was just a complete. It was crazy to see him kind of transform when he started to prep for shows.
I love how often that happens in natural bodybuilding because you don't look big in clothes. Even I'll spoil the plot a little bit, but Brian DaCosta, who ended up winning the heavyweight title in a big upset and then winning the overall, this guy is, weighing in depleted at 5'7", 5'8", at nearly 200 pounds on stage, probably breaking some FFMI calculators and having people who, misinterpret research thinking they're being evidence-based really frustrated about how they're breaking science, or at least pseudoscience. But he put up a picture not too long ago and of just him in clothes versus next to it. And you'd like, oh yeah. I mean, he's not a small guy in clothes. Don't get me wrong, but you certainly wouldn't think overall heavyweight champion bodybuilder.
Right? Yeah. It always sounds like an insult when you say like you're surprised when you see him on stage, but it's just like this odd thing about natural bodybuilding where like. Rich, I'm sure when he's like around town, when he goes to church, people aren't like, look at this hulking monster barreling down the pews, But then you see him on stage, you're like, where did that come from? Oh my God. Yeah. But anyway, Trevor at that gym, he was doing like I think it was his first season competing, I think. But he basically won his pro card and then was like, yeah, I think I might do Worlds, and got second at Worlds, within a couple weeks of earning his pro card. And he used to always be the example when I would talk to people who were discouraged because they're like, man, I'm so close to getting my pro card, but I came in second. And it's like, dude, like a pro card is like part being prepared, part being persistent, and then part luck. Because like sometimes you are going to go miss out on your pro card. And you could have had the third best physique in the world. but guess what? Literally someone who is going to get second at Worlds in 2 weeks just rolls up to an amateur show and you say, what the hell are you doing here? Go be a pro, right? But you just never know who's going to show up. But yeah, Trevor was just like, yeah, I think I'll try this out. And then it's like, yeah, dude, you're number 2 in the world now in a matter of like 2 weeks. So weird.
100%. Yeah. And that's kind of a cool thing about natural bodybuilding is that as an amateur, I've competed against some pretty wild people when you look at what do they go on to do. Jeff Alberts being one of them. I was in a couple of overalls with him. So that is the way it works, And so yeah, just it's really cool because you're really not that big, and when you're in shape, it really does come down to like structure. It's insane how much of natural bodybuilding comes down to illusions and relative waist size to other things. It's like some of these guys, oh man, he's got to have huge broad shoulders. It's like, now he has a small waist, and he has small joints and his arms attached well. Those are 15.5-inch arms, but he's 5'6". Okay. And it's another world. So I think I had just gone through the fourth place, Doug King. He won the amateur middleweights and overall. So there's a little insight into what happened on the prior day. The third place was a really good bodybuilder, also in his rookie season, Agostino Russo. And he actually had just come off a win at the Washington show where I met him, where he beat Jeff. So he won a pro show. So this is a really high quality middleweight class, right? So excellent athlete. And then, but again, it was actually really a two-man race for 1 and 2, and I know it was close. We had the Phenom in first place at 21 years old, bringing the kind of conditioning that is arguably the standard right now. I think him and Dirk are probably the two leanest guys who got on stage, maybe along with, I'll spoil the plot a little bit, one of our heavyweight competitors, Robert Thompson. It was also incredibly, incredibly lean. Cross-striated rectus femoris, something you don't see very often. But anyway, Benjamin Schuster won the middleweights, and he was one of the he was favored to win the middleweights, or maybe the heavyweights. They weren't sure where he was going to fall because he's kind of right at that cutoff, and they thought he'd be potentially the one to dethrone Bodybuilding, who's the two-time, the reigning WNBF World Champion. But he ended up in the middles, and he had just an incredible physique. He's been coming off a streak of wins. He's been going head-to-head with some of the best in Europe right now. So he's gone head-to-head with Dirk. I mentioned Dirk won the lightweight title in a WNBF Pro show. Guess who beat him in the overall? Benjamin Schuster, who won the heavies. He also won a couple of these other natural shows that are open invite. I mentioned Dirk placed second at the ANBF show. Who beat him? It was Benjamin Schuster. They also won the Evo Classic, which is another big show in Germany. So Benjamin has been undefeated this season, and that was the same that happened in this middleweight class. And some of the people he's being undefeated to are quite good, like Dirk Emmerich. And also, they got to clash again here, Frederick Ibsen, who is also an excellent European bodybuilder. And Frederick is just a great guy. I got to talk to him a good bit. He has a incredibly thick physique, and his age makes more sense. So Benjamin Schuster is 21, looks like he's got a physique that someone who's 31. Frederick's a little older, and unbelievably, he is a little bit thicker, and he has a little more density and size compared to Benjamin Schuster. And anyone would objectively say he's shredded. But they're shredded, and then there's levels of shredded. And I think what just nudged it over was that Benjamin was slightly leaner, and he literally, you can see every single fiber in his glutes, and everything else is in. But there was definitely a few shots where Frederick was out-muscling him. He might have beat him from the front, Frederick, I think. And then it came to the back and the sides and the overall conditioning package. I definitely think there are some judges that probably would have given it Frederick's way, but this is a very tight fight. And I think this is probably closer that Frederick got to Benjamin than previously. And some had thought this was actually going to be a three-man race with another athlete from Germany who didn't show up this year, but last year's middleweight winner, Fabian Farid, who has an incredible physique. He comes in very hard, and he's also very symmetrical. He had been battling it out, but he decided to try to get his IFBB pro card. I think he might have, actually, in the classic physique category. Not sure if he's going to stay or come back or cross-compete or what have you. There's some current rulings and issues with that, but he didn't end up doing Worlds, and that was maybe, it's disappointing. But Fabian had actually been getting beaten by Schuster as well. So many people right now, even though this is, I think, Schuster's just second season, are saying like, he is the guy to beat. He's the second coming. He's a young Doug Miller, maybe just a little more size. He'll be there with even crazier conditioning. And I think that's a very fair mantle to put on him based upon his performance. So that was the middleweight class. These are two guys I got to pump up with and hang with and talk to them. And it was impressive. And like I said, Third place just came off a pro show, Agustina Russo. Fourth place just won the overall the day prior. And then fifth place was your double Mr. Universe, Malcolm Cooper. So extremely, extremely competitive middleweight class, as it always is at Worlds. But what is typically not as a competitive class, Eric, is the heavies. And that's not just because the athletes aren't competitive, but typically because it's a not well-populated class, because not many people are weighing in at over 185 in the pros as lean as they need to be to compete at Worlds. So you're typically looking at a class, I think, in Worlds when I attended last, it was 4 or maybe 5 athletes in the heavies. This year, however, it was just as big as the middleweights, and I think there were actually 10 heavyweights. So there might have been one more athlete than the middles. This was not that the middles was small, there was 9 of us, but there were 16 lights and 10 heavies. So this was a bit of an aberration this year where we had far more people in the lightweight class than both the middles and the heavies. And actually the middles was by a little bit, one athlete, the least populated class.
Not a pretty distribution if you like statistics.
No, the judges were advised to use non-parametric statistics when they were figuring out who won. Now, as is often the case, you'd say, the middles, that's where that, bell curve is. That's where the most competitive battles are. And like I said, that was a very competitive top 5, but it was a 2-man race. The heavies were not to be outdone. And you could even make an argument, at least upon resumes, that the heavyweights were more competitive. I actually think the lightweights are the most competitive class if you just looked at who was there and how hard was it to judge, because there were 16 of them. But in terms of just who showed up in the heavies, it was insane. So you had, of course, Bodybuilding, the reigning heavyweight, who is just a bubbly ball of muscle. And when he comes in diced, people think he's impossible to beat. And that turned out not to be the case. And it wasn't because he was off. So Bodybuilding came in fantastic shape. And then Brian DaCosta, who came in. I actually competed with Brian at 2019 in the Mayhem. That was his first time competing in the bodybuilding division. And he didn't quite win his pro card because it was very clear that it was his first time. He didn't quite have the posing. He didn't quite have the conditioning. He did look like a first-timer. He had competed at men's physique, but this guy is huge. I don't know that there's actually anyone in natural bodybuilding at the moment who is big as Brian DaCosta, and he brought the conditioning, and he brought it well. Really no missing body parts, and he ended up edging out Bada and went on to then beat Benjamin Schuster and Dirk. So he was in shape if he's standing between Benjamin Schuster and Dirk and he's winning, right? He did what Frederick Ibsen could not. I would say they were in similar shape. So the amount of size that Brian brought was even more so than that of Frederick in the middleweights. He is truly a monster. And that wasn't all that was going on in that heavyweight class, Eric. So that top five, let's talk about it, okay? By the end of the night, there were 4 people who could claim that they're world champions at one time or another in that top 5. So rounding out in 5th place was our friend Sam Okinola, who has won world titles in IPE and Worlds as a heavyweight. I think he's won the IPE Worlds overall. And I think he's, if I recall correctly, and Sam, my apologies if I'm getting your resume a little wrong, I want to say he has won his class in the heavyweights in WNBF Worlds. He might have won the overall. I could be wrong there. So he's a world champion. And then in 4th is recent DFAC Worlds winner and also Mr. America winner, which doesn't have the word world in the title, but the Mr. America is definitely a world caliber show. It's one of those open division shows, right? He won both of those this year. So he was coming off just a week ago, having won DFAC Worlds. He placed 4th, and he has an incredibly symmetrical, he has probably the most aesthetic, pretty physique that you would ever expect to see on a heavyweight. Flowing lines, very small waist, incredible condition, and just really great shape to all his muscles. And he's built like a taller, longer muscled person, so just to kind of shows the quality and the density of what he brings to the table. So those were two of the world champions in the mix. And then, of course, you had Bada, and then by the end of the night, you had Brian DaCosta. So the heavyweights absolutely were not outdone. by anybody. It wasn't a weak class or a small class. It was incredibly deep. And the overall was a sight to behold. It is easily the most competitive overall I've ever seen in natural bodybuilding. So the sport is healthy. It's definitely bounced back after COVID. And that's just the men's bodybuilding side. I also want to, obviously, as someone who competes in men's bodybuilding, that's what I'm most interested in, because I'm literally competing in the pros, so I'm giving a very biased take. But let's talk about some of the women who did an awesome job in this competition. Also, all the men's physique competitors like, yo, what about me? And I'm like, sorry, man. Iron Culture with Eric Helms, we're going to be a little more muscle-centric. On the women's side, I want to talk about specifically two athletes, Eric. And that is, one of them did something historic that has never been done before, and it is pretty nuts. And that is Natalie Hayes. So this is a self-coached female bodybuilder. She's coming off of winning the female bodybuilding division in the Mr. America, which we just talked about. Coming off winning the pro category female bodybuilding in the Natural Olympia, another world title, just a week ago. She goes into the amateurs, wins her pro card on Saturday, winning the overall women's bodybuilding title. Sunday, she then wins the pro women's bodybuilding title. She is the standard. And she's self-coached. She introduced herself to me, and I was honored that she said she appreciates my content. Used some information from my books to self-coach. She's pretty damn young. But no, Natalie Hayes has an incredible physique. She's just got everything, top to bottom, condition, shape, small waist, shoulders, big quads, and she was a well-deserved title winner. And I think she could probably be sitting there for as long as she wants,
Yeah.
So big shout out to Natalie Hayes. I actually think we should get her on the podcast, and I've done some of the preliminary reaching out there. And then in the second most muscular category, and this category across different federations, depending on what you're used to or which ones you follow, has different names. It's basically figure in terms of the fact that you're wearing heels. You're typically wearing a suit that looks like figure, but it also has some muscular posing. So that's sometimes called Miss Physique. It's sometimes called figure down under here in Australia, or Miss Figure. In the WNBF specifically, it's called Fit Body. So the Fit Body category was actually won by Becky Pateman. Again, this is someone who is coming off a lot of impressive competitions. She just won, I want to say, the figure overall in Natural Olympia a week ago, and I actually met her at the Australia show where she won the overall Fit Body title, as well as the figure title, getting pro cards in both. So she is incredible, a well-deserved win, just fantastic shape, muscularity in all the right places, and just a well-deserved winner there. So yeah, it's rare that you get people who are able to win across multiple federations and be so dominant like that. And that is kind of, when you do that, it makes a statement. It kind of harkens back to when Brian Whitaker at his best in 2015, he won both actually, I forgot something I need to tell you. He won both the Yorton Cup as well as WNBF Worlds, and that was a historic moment. Going back to Natalie Hayes, I mentioned she won the Natural Olympia. That was a verbal typo. She won the Yorton Cup, not the Natural Olympia. It was actually, Becky Pateman who won Natural Olympia last weekend.
Yeah, I mean, which federation runs the Yorton?
So the Yorton was the IFPA and the OCB when they were still together, but now it is just the OCB. So the OCB has actually kind of just been its own federation now, and it's been growing steadily in the U.S. So it is domestically probably the second biggest organization or similar size to the domestic WNBF, which is the INBF. So no, I think the Yorton is still a fantastic show, just as high caliber. If you were to think of what's like the natural bodybuilding single federation like Trinity of competitions, it would be the Natural Olympia, the Yorton Cup, and in my opinion, the most competitive of all three of them, although not by a ton, would be WNBF Worlds.
Yeah, we like Trinities around here.
Absolutely. And then if we're talking non-sanctioned invites to everyone else, and domestically, we're looking at the Mr. America. And it's a little different. That's not a polygraph one. They use, I think, the same testing that the NCAA does. So it's still high quality testing, but it is urinalysis only. And same thing with the PNBA. They typically don't do polygraph, but both the OCB and the WNBF do polygraph to get on stage. And then if you win money or get a pro card, you're urine tested, and they sometimes do additional urine testing. I wouldn't say at random, but like targeted and typically in competition or sometimes with someone in the audience, which is we're not quite at the point where we have like the registered testing pools and
Wait, so they'll go grab someone from the audience who's not competing at the show and just be like, hey.
Yep.
Wow.
I've seen it happen. Yeah, the WNBF has done that because they don't have the ability or the authority, because they're not like under necessarily like a national testing pool to go to your house and at a random time and all that. Although you can write it into a contract. That's something that WNBF Australia is doing. But yeah, they will sometimes just go, right, I'm going to test the person at second, even though they didn't win something, or we're going to test someone in the audience. So for example, in 2019, I got tested even though I got second in the Polynesian muscle mayhem. So yeah.
I got a random tip from the internet.
Yes. And I'm sure annoyingly it was probably, they said I was on Clen or something. I never get accused of using the big, I know I've arrived, Eric, when I'm getting accused of Tren, not Clen. You know what I'm saying? Not there yet.
I hear you.
So that is that's kind of the main ones I wanted to talk about. Becky Pateman and Natalie Hayes on the women's side, who are winning multiple world titles and doing the incredible. And then just how competitive the men's bodybuilding was, where you've got Dirk Emmerich coming off of his historic overall amateur season where he wins the overall title as a bantam, never done before, to then come in and win his rookie pro season the lightweight title. And then the middleweight winner, Benjamin Schuster, who people were saying was undefeated or undefeatable and potentially going to beat Bada, not even going up against Bada, but going up against Brian DaCosta, who was coming off a pro win and was kind of a dark horse favorite. But when you look at some of the posts, everyone was basically saying it's going to be Dirk, Benjamin, and Bada in the overall.
Yeah.
And ended up that Bada did not get out of the heavies. So to say it was a competitive year at WNBF Worlds would be quite the understatement. And then you had these two dominant multi-federation champions coming in and taking the fit body and the women's bodybuilding classes. So I personally, Eric, I would love to get Dirk on. I think the fact that he did that in his rookie season and doing it as a bantam in the amateurs and the lightweights, and I'd love to get both Becky and Natalie on, and we're gonna talk to these folks so you can get a closer insight into the world of natural bodybuilding. It's something I'd like to do moving forward, and since I'm 1/3 of the votes on that, and Omar's not around, I think we got a good chance of getting that passed by the committee.
Yeah, I do have a question for you. I started out in the bodybuilding world. I was pretty tapped in. When I was really tapped into it, the kind of epicenter of the natural bodybuilding discourse was the bodybuilding.com forums, and then a little bit on Facebook. That was a long time ago. That was years and years ago, probably about a decade now. When you say, everyone's saying this, everyone's saying that, where does this discussion happen these days?
It's going down on the gram, baby.
Instagram. Okay.
Instagram is the spot. It's a visual medium. And I got to give a big shout out to the Natty News Daily crew. They do an excellent job of covering the show winners. Like if you look at Natty News Daily's Instagram, that you'll see that, you know how you get recommended, if you want to really blow up, post, at least 3 times a week or maybe even once a day if you want to go crazy. They don't have a when should I post. They have I post when things happen. So if you look on their page on the Saturday or the Sunday of Worlds, they had every division winner listed and saying, hey, if you know who they are, tag them. Congratulations to them. And they put up stage pictures as they occur. And they typically know someone who's in the show who's taking pictures, and they're putting it up in more or less real time. Yeah, they're doing a great job. And, natural bodybuilding is small. They're coming up on 20,000 followers. That's reasonably big if we're talking about people interested in competitive natural bodybuilding. So go ahead and give them a follow. That is natty_news_daily. They do a great job. It is guys who are actually competitors, and also a promoter, Leroy Rollins. He's a WNBF Canada pro. Great guys. They remind me of young 3DMJers with their passion for promoting the sport. But yeah, you'll be able to find a lot of pictures, recent, things that are going on, and they're all over the show. They're covering Kiyoshi Moody's comeback and how he won a Masters IFBB Pro card. They got, winners from Korea. They got everyone from WNBF Worlds. They got the Natural Olympia last weekend. They've got all kinds of stuff covered there. So that is the spot if you want to actually follow competitive natural bodybuilding, and you can link back and follow some of these folks. And when I was saying everyone was saying, there was actually a post they did where pictures were taken of the actual lineups at Worlds. So someone who took a picture, who was standing next to me, took a picture of the lightweight, who's in the lights, who's in the middles, who's in the heavies, sent it to them. They posted it up, and then everyone's predicting who they think is going to win each one of the categories. So, yeah.
So
it's
on that Instagram account, how often do they post speculative threads about when I'm going to make my comeback?
You know what? I'm hoping that they might be doing their first one after this is released, because people want to know.
I'm sick of people asking. I always in my DMs, always making posts, calling me out on the internet. I'll do it when I'm good and ready. Okay.
I think that's fair. You know what? You don't owe anybody anything. You're the champ, Eric.
All right. So I know you don't want to make it all about you, but what's next for you? Are you going to do the reverse diet that I told you about? You're going to add 1 gram of carbohydrate every 2 weeks until you're good to go?
I'm being a little more aggressive. I actually added 5 grams, which is, that's 5 times what you recommended. I also added 1 gram of fat, and I dropped my cardio down by 5 minutes on Mondays.
Okay.
So I'm predicting to be in a surplus at some point the day before my pro debut in 2025.
Yeah.
Or I should say, sorry, my pro season debut.
Yeah.
I anticipate at that point I'll have that metabolism revved up. I won't have built any muscle, so hopefully we're content with the package I have now, because I'm going to maintain it the whole time.
Correct. Yeah. But so now is it a little recovery diet, and then are you going to stick with bodybuilding, or are you going to keep doing that nonsense where you bounce between every sport in the world?
No, I've actually heard on really good authority that power building is actually an abomination, and that the entire history of physical culture is actually debunked. So, Connor, I'm looking at you over at the obelisk. Apparently, the only true way to be ideologically pure is to train for things which are physiologically not separate and actually inseparable, and have also historically always been joined to some degree, or even the exact same thing. And it is abomination. And I've heard that it is almost impossible to gain strength and size at the same time, and that the average person who walks into the gym, if they were to do something foolish, like try to get strong and big at the same time, they're actually leaving massive gains on the table of both. And the thing that's holding back the average fitness person who comes into the gym for 1 hour per week, Eric, is that they're not choosing stable enough exercise. They're doing something stupid like a squat, which is clearly just for strength, instead of doing something like a pendulum hack on the very first day of training. So obviously I'm being very facetious, and I'm probably going to get a video made about me now that I've waded into that current argument. But no, I think in all seriousness, I am actually at the point where, for me, at the age of 40, where I have to put in a lot of time and effort, and I do actually run out of kind of space in the optimization game whenever I focus on powerlifting or bodybuilding. And I think that's something that wasn't even the case for me maybe 10 years ago, and when I'd still been training for 9 years. So I have actually decided to go monogamous for the first time.
It's a big step. You've had a lot of commitment issues previously.
I'm putting a ring on bodybuilding, Eric, and it is for the specific fact that I think and I believe that I can become an improbable pro champion. I'm not saying necessarily a world pro champion, but I might set the goal of trying to place top 5 at Worlds, and maybe see if I can place top 3 in like a pro show. But I think to do it, I will actually need to invest all of the time and effort I have available and all of my recuperative capacity towards optimizing the hypertrophy process. Because I am 40, and not that that's actually the point, it's just that I've been training for 19 years, and to make these targeted physique changes and the time course that it takes, even doing something like just working up to some singles to maintain strength, I notice, that's not enough for me to gain strength, for one, and I can work it into a bodybuilding program, but what am I gaining from that if I'm not actually going to be competing in powerlifting? And if I wanted to actually get stronger, that is a whole nother level of training. That's me training 8 to 10 hours per week, mostly dedicated to powerlifting. And then what do I have time left over for? Okay, let me get some calves and arms in real quick. Certainly that's enough so that I don't get smaller, right? So that is kind of the point where I actually do think there's an argument to be made where, quote unquote, power building is insufficient to get you if you want to get from 95% of peak capacity to 99%. But I think 99% of people don't get to 95% of their peak capacity. So I think they max out the rate of gains they can get in strength or hypertrophy by doing a power building program. And most people, have goals that are both functional and aesthetic. So that was a complete divergent thing that I did talking about power building. But to answer your question, fully going in on bodybuilding and really looking forward to it, actually.
Nice. So back on stage in 2 years then?
I think that's the plan, unless there's any WNBF Worlds rule changes as to when you can compete as a pro. I would be okay with competing in 2025 because of how targeted and focused I would be. But I think if I really could be like, all right, what's ideal? I would maybe do 2026 just to give myself a little more of an off season. To answer your question nutritionally, I am doing a recovery diet, but it is on the conservative side of things based upon what I've seen now as a 5-season competitor. Each time I compete, I find it easier to get lean. I notice that a lot of the quote-unquote diet fatigue that I associate with the body fat percentage might be more so that I'm, dieting harder than I need to be. And with the amount that we preserved my psychology and my physiology this contest prep, I was feeling fine at 82, 83 kilos. I don't know if I would be fully optimized physiologically to make muscle gains at 82 or 83 kilos. But I think 85, 86, absolutely. And that's actually 10 kilos lighter than I started this prep. And it's even 3 kilos lighter than when I started my 2019 prep, where I did a little bit of a prep positioning diet. So part of the experiment is going to be doing something maybe more akin to a reverse diet, but a version of a reverse diet that includes me relatively expeditiously getting up from my low weigh end of about 79-ish up to 82, 83. So for the Americans out there, we're talking gaining 9 to 10 pounds in, a month and then slowing down versus what I did in, say, 2019, where I gained 20 pounds in 6 weeks and then slowed down.
Yeah.
But it'll be an experiment. I might find that I do that. I get some blood work done and, I'm anemic and at the bottom of the reference range of testosterone and I'm like, yeah, maybe not. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, selfishly, I'm excited for this because when I look at the mass lineup, I think it's good that we have a broad coverage of different topics and interest levels. And so as you obsess over the bodybuilding and hypertrophy side of things, we've got Zordos over there obsessing over the more powerlifting adjacent topics, and Lauren and I continue doing our thing. So I love it. I think it's going to make every mass issue just a little bit extra beautiful.
And Eric, if someone wanted to get these mass issues,
yeah,
and it just so happened to be the Monday after Black Friday, is there anything that we should discuss related to that?
It's interesting that you would bring that up. Couple updates from the mass world. Not going to spend quite as much time as the WNBF World updates, but actually just an hour ago, we had the good Dr. Brad Schoenfeld on our office hours. So if you listen to Iron Culture and you don't listen to mass office hours, what are you doing? I mean, I love you. I'm glad you're here, but you should be there too. Every Wednesday night, the mass crew, me, Dr. Helms, Dr. Zordos, Lauren Colenso-Semple, a couple of us hop on YouTube and we do a live show. Okay. The bright lights are on and we go. Okay, there's no rehearsals, there's no edits, no going back. Once you hit play,
live.
You're doing it live. So every Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, we go about an hour and a half, and we answer live questions in the chat on YouTube. We also accept questions throughout the week. We've got a link that lives forever and accepts questions 24/7. So if you like the no-nonsense, evidence-based fitness Q&A type content, we're doing that live on YouTube. Our handle is @Mass Research Review over on YouTube. And then we also put that on podcast platforms as well. So anyway, the reason that we had Brad Schoenfeld on is twofold. First of all, Brad's awesome. He knows everything about hypertrophy. We asked him a bunch of questions, and he's one of those few researchers where it's like when you ask him a question, almost always he can refer to a study he did. Because he's been cranking them out over the last decade or so. So it was a really fantastic episode. I know, Helms, you weren't on the episode. You were in the peanut gallery. It was a really good one. But
It was.
It's the first time we've ever had a guest on. And we wanted to make it extra special because today, when we're recording this, Wednesday, November 22nd, the Mass Black Friday sale has officially begun. Prices are already dropped for Mass subscriptions for Black Friday. We do monthly subscription options. You can do a yearly subscription. You can even do a lifetime subscription to the Mass Research Review. The first of the month, every month, we publish a new issue. It's got articles, it's got videos, it's got audio summaries, and we cover the newest and most useful research every single month pertaining to training, nutrition, psychology, behavior change, coaching, you name it. Everything that's relevant to a fitness enthusiast, to a lifter who wants to help themselves out or help out their clients or people that they train with at the gym. So the Mass Research Review is absolute gold. The Black Friday sale is officially live, and the prices are going to stay low. These are the lowest they will ever be. It's the biggest discount that we ever do, the biggest sale of the year. Prices are going to go back to normal at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, November 29th. So head over to massresearchreview.com to learn more about the product and to subscribe while the prices are as low as they will ever be. Now, with that out of the way, Dr. Helms, I understand there's another Black Friday sale going on, one that you might be an official sponsored athlete for.
Now, Omar has made it very clear to me that I'm technically a branded athlete, not sponsored.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's literally because I have a tattoo of one of the designs I use on one of their shirts. And I'm actually wearing one of the limited edition Iron Culture shirts that Omar specifically made for me based upon the old school design they have, which I'm not sure you can get anymore. I probably shouldn't be showing it to you. Omar's like, listen, that's sold out. Please don't promote that during the Black Friday sale. But I won't promote a specific shirt, but I will say as a Rascal Apparel branded athlete, on Omar's behalf, which he did not ask me to do, and he'll probably be annoyed that I did this, but just as a favor to him that he never asked for, Rascal Apparel. I love their clothes. They're amazing, irreverent, subtly subversive, and also they look great. Arms are popping, hilarious designs or serious designs, depending on what you like. Rascal Apparel also has a Black Friday sale going on right now. And I don't know about you, but when I'm reading scientific articles, I need to feel like I look like the person who would be reading those scientific articles, but not being boxed in by them, being a free spirit, and knowing that anecdotes, observations, and research all go together. And what says that but like a Rascal Apparel shirt while having on your nice e-reader Mass popping up?
Absolutely. And I would also like to add that I'm also a Rascal branded athlete because I'm now affiliated with the Religion and Social Change Lab at Duke University, RASCL. We do call ourselves Rascal.
Oh, that is amazing. I remember you telling me that, and I had forgot. I'm so glad that is still true and still hilarious.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We don't have a Black Friday sale. Our research is normal price.
Okay, same price research.
Yeah.
Just you getting together with the Rascal crew over at Duke. I love it.
What a coincidence.
Awesome.
All right, so with all the sales pitches out of the way, should we get into some science? Put a little icing on the cake here?
Let's do it. And there will be timestamps up for this for those of you who are like, I don't care about bodybuilding and I don't care about sales. I wanted to hear about some science. you've already clicked on this and you're going
to the show.
You're delaying me further right now, and we'll have another timestamp for when I start after I'm done talking about timestamps. Thank you, Kai. So yeah, I wanted to go over relatively quickly a cool study, at least that I think is cool. And let me ask you this, Eric, because I think there's an interesting methodology aspect of this study that's worth talking about, not just the findings. Were you familiar with a meta-ethnography before I brought this paper up to you?
No, I mean, I was familiar with a good old-fashioned, ethnographic research. I was not familiar with meta-ethnography.
Neither was I. So that was a kind of a cool thing. So, but we got to take a step back before I even jump into what is a meta-ethnography. Let's talk about kind of the two broad schools of research methods, and that's quantitative and qualitative research. So quantitative is probably what you're most familiar with in the fitness industry, where we tend to talk about numbers. Most often we're using frequentist statistics to talk about significant differences. Less often we're talking about other approaches, Bayesian models, etc. But ultimately we're trying to figure out whether or not a numerical value is larger than another, or whether a frequency of occurrence of something that is not numerical is happening more often than another, whether that's a survey or two people sprinting and seeing whether or not one of them taking creatine, hit the timing gate faster. We have these statistical methods that are going, okay, based upon our sample size, based upon repeated measures, based upon whatever, was that actually a larger number? Was that mean greater than that other mean when we consider its variance? And then, okay, what does that mean? What inferences do we make from that? And the whole school of research, that's quantitative, and that's the majority of what both Trexler and I do. But I've actually had the privilege, as I've moved into the last maybe 6 or 7 years of research, of doing more and more mixed methods work. And this is something I think is really important in applied sciences where you're dealing with people. And I imagine you rascals probably get into this a little bit these days, which might be a newer thing for you.
Oh, a tremendous amount of qualitative work. Yeah,
absolutely. So if I was to say quantitative research asks the question of what and then provides applications as to how, qualitative research asks the questions of why and maybe who. I think you could say maybe understanding who the who is, and this is pretty important because, as Eric, you've done a really good job talking about in kind of a later stage of your career, it's very difficult to coach someone effectively, even if you are eventually going to give them quantitative prescription or guidance, or help them find out what's the best thing to actually do, the how, without knowing why they would want to do it in the first place and what is driving them to do it. And that is the cornerstone of effective coaching, understanding, and even self-reflection and figuring out what's going to really get me up out of bed in the morning and either pursue my health, fitness, performance, or competitive goals. So qualitative research is all about asking why. And like I said, I've been getting into mixed methods, which means just using both in recent years. Most of my students, especially when they're investigating something novel in a specific area, a lot of what they do in the early phase of their thesis is doing surveys, which are generally quantitative, but either informing the surveys with focus groups or individual qualitative interviews, or actually recruiting a handful of people from a specific population, not randomly, but targeted, because we actually are interested in what are your thoughts, what's going on in your neck of the woods, and why are you doing the things you do, and what hypotheses might you have as to what we should research. And this is a basic model of understanding that research should be collaborative with participants if we're trying to serve a given population. And it's becoming much more standard now, and I think this is a very good thing, for the process of consultation to occur when you're researching a given population. Incredibly important when you're doing things related to social change. If you're researching, say, indigenous cultures and how they're positioned in society, if you're not actually talking to those people, it's highly likely your research is going to be less impactful for them, right? So the same thing is true whether you want to study bodybuilders or powerlifters. So many of my students and myself, we've had the opportunity to sit down with very high-level coaches, very high-level athletes, or just this broad spectrum of athletes and ask them, why do you do what you do? And that often is a process. One of the most common methods within this methodology is thematic analysis. It's just kind of what it sounds like. You're transcribing an interview, or it's being automated and you're looking for themes that seem to persist across the group of people you're talking to. And then from there, you describe those themes, and you can understand what are some of the persistent themes that are popping up and why do people do what they do. So just like a meta-analysis takes a whole bunch of, RCTs or surveys or any type of quantitative study, and it combines them to get some standardized effect estimates or mean differences if you're comparing two different things. A meta-ethnography is taking a whole bunch of qualitative work and looking for themes across studies. And just like a meta-analysis can sometimes, just like some of the ones on protein, primarily observe non-significant effects, but come away with a relatively clear, typically small effect size that is significant when you aggregate all that data because you're enhancing statistical power. A meta-ethnography, because it's looking at a bunch of different angles on the same question of the same population, it can make novel inferences as to the motivations or constructs and the whys behind a group of people because different qualitative researchers ask different questions, and they may be connected to other qualitative interviews. And they follow a similar, process. You've got your Cochrane guidelines for meta-analysis. You've got equivalent things for meta-ethnography. So you're looking for specific themes. You have inclusion criteria. You go through a search process, and you go through this step-by-step process. So a really cool study that popped up that I saw was one by Wilmot and colleagues that just came out, and it's titled "The Perfect Storm: A Meta-Ethnography of the Motivations, Behaviors, and Experiences of Competitive Bodybuilders." So obviously right up my alley, and it was pretty cool. And I was reading the study, and it basically collated a ton of different interviews with bodybuilders and asked them like, hey, why do you do what you do? And this is an important question because if you were to step outside of kind of the Brad Schoenfeld, Eric Helms, Eric Trexler line of research, where we just kind of look at the cool physiology and then the applications of bodybuilding, most people researching bodybuilding are taking an angle that is related to, I would say, generally inadvisable outcomes psychologically, physiologically.
They study bodybuilding disorder.
Correct. I think the authors politically correctly used the idea of pathologizing bodybuilding, right? So there are a ton of researchers in the qualitative space who would probably take the position that bodybuilding is often a disorder. Not all of it, but there's a huge sector that is just asking the question of why would people do this? And if you're someone who views it as a sport, you'd be like, well, that's like asking, why would I play baseball? Like, because I like baseball.
Yeah. Why do you like putting that orange ball through that hoop so much?
Yeah, must be something wrong with you, right? And that's the angle they take. Now, obviously, I'll be the first to admit that bodybuilding is a little weird compared to baseball, at least by society standards. I mean, it is kind of weird that we're randomly hitting balls with bats and then you run around bases. It's all very arbitrary when you really think about sport. But bodybuilding, it does have a unique position as half art, half sport, and wholly painful when you compete in it. So
it materially impacts metrics pertaining to health. It involves body image. I mean,
yes.
There's more to it than you get with other team sports.
Absolutely. And I think it is important to recognize that all sports, when they become competitive rather than community-based, which typically, should happen as you become an adult or a professional, not necessarily the way that works in reality. That competitive drive when winning becomes the first thing that you're trying to achieve rather than, say, camaraderie or team building or all the other reasons why we might hopefully put our daughters or sons or children into sport. All those things take a backseat to winning when you look at professional sport or highly competitive sport. So once you make something competitive, that's when you typically run into these conflicts, and people will sacrifice to win. To quote the good Dr. Elaine Norton. And that comes with sacrifices. And that is accepting maybe I'm going to get a TBI if I want to play high-level continuous American football or any contact sport, really. Or I'm potentially going to get an ACL tear. There's some very extreme sports out there. And while bodybuilding doesn't seem extreme from a physical exertion on competition day perspective, you don't get to leave and go home and forget about what happened after practice when you're in a competitive cycle of bodybuilding. There is a focus on your body, like you said, on your eating. And in mainstream bodybuilding, there's the assumption of the use of anabolic steroids or drugs because, natural bodybuilding kind of started in the 70s and 80s in terms of organizationally. And there had been the Olympia starting since 1965 and the Mr. America and the Mr. Universe competitions even prior to that. And it was right around the 60s where it started to become apparent that a little more than, good old-fashioned, really terrible tasting protein powder, chicken breasts, and a trip down to Gold's Gym was all that was going on. So, yeah. So anyway, the authors acknowledge that a large portion of the research in the bodybuilding space that is qualitative in nature is exploring why would you do this because you probably shouldn't. But not all of it is. Some does look at it from the perspective of there being positive, even facilitative aspects of the motivation of bodybuilders. So I was really interested in this ethnography because they acknowledged that on the front end. And they said, maybe we, in this meta-ethnography, because we're not going to take any specific stance. We're going to have studies that are looking at it pathologically. We're going to have some of it look at it from other angles. Because there's everything from exercise dependence to self-esteem issues to self-esteem building to, covariance with eating disorders. There's a lot going on. And the one limitation I would say of this meta-ethnography, however, is because of looking at qualitative research on bodybuilding, there is not the acknowledgement even of the existence of natural bodybuilding in this paper. And just by chance, if you were to look at all of the quantitative research on bodybuilders, all the stuff that was done in like 2005 or earlier is mostly on just bodybuilding generally. And there's a discussion of, anabolic steroid use and how that could confound our data, yada, 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 mostly observational. But right around the 20-teens, late 2000s, was when a bunch of natural bodybuilders had gotten to the point where they were starting their master's degrees. And now you're listening to two of them talk to one another. And now we're, about 15 years deep into there being, for some reason, I still don't know why, a bunch of natural bodybuilding research getting published, dozens of case studies, and even more so. And, we go on to inspire one another, we get connected. And here we are, where we have this interesting bias of a little bit toward natural bodybuilding research in the quantitative side, and then the complete lack of awareness on the qualitative side because they're focused on the potential harms that people are experiencing, which often is exacerbated by performance and image-enhancing drug use.
And I will say,
it's weird, right?
When you think about what fields are you seeing a lot of qualitative research and qualitative research training, a lot of times it's in sociology and adjacent fields. And I will acknowledge, if I were a sociologist, the story is way more interesting in the non-tested side because they're trying to get at, this really intriguing list of motivators of what motivates you to push to these very jarring extremes to the general population, and what pushes you to engage in extremely high-risk behavior in terms of violating the law to get, PEDs and using PEDs with known, health ramifications. So I understand why there's so much interest from outsiders where if you're going to do a qualitative study on bodybuilders, it's like, well, this side over here is very, very fascinating because it's everything turned up to 11, so I get that. But at the same time, I would be intrigued. Hopefully more people will start doing qualitative stuff on the natural side because I've always told people, and this is not something that I usually am against the general concept of gatekeeping, but I've often told people it's going to be very difficult to be a proficient and effective bodybuilding coach if you've not competed well.
Yeah.
Because I think it's difficult to fully understand without firsthand experience what that feels like and what that process is like going through a prep and a recovery and a prep and a recovery. You need to go through a couple of those cycles, in my opinion, to be able to have the experience and knowledge to guide somebody through that and to be the calm, steady presence in the room to help someone kind of navigate all those weird challenges. So I've often told people there's just some weird things about bodybuilding that you kind of need to feel. in my opinion. But I do think if we had more really high quality qualitative research on natural bodybuilders, perhaps I would loosen up on that stance. If there was a good record of, all these different experiences that are kind of organized in a thoughtful way, maybe I'd change my tune. But yeah, there's definitely a discrepancy where the qualitative stuff right now is all natural, or the quantitative is all natural, and the qualitative is decidedly not.
Yeah. And so, like I said, that is a limitation of this paper. And I bet if I hit up the researchers and I said, hey, by the way, I'm a natural bodybuilder, they'd say, what? Like, okay, I don't know what that means. Explain that to me.
They think you're just like, I'm a natural born bodybuilder. I was made for this. They make sure you're
non-GMO. Yeah. So yeah, it is an interesting dichotomy. And I think that limitation, you might think, actually, you might not. If you listen to the last episode we just had where me and Mike Israel just kind of shared our experiences, for 80% of that podcast, I was just sitting there nodding, and then I'd say something and he would nod. And we got right to the end and he started talking about the concessions and the changes and the impact of drug use. And I was like, oh. And then now you saw me being the interested third party person. So there are differences, but I would say that the average drug-free bodybuilder and the average enhanced bodybuilder have more in common to one another than they do the average person who lifts. I'll say that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We're similar kinds of crazies and slightly different levels of risk averseness, I would say.
Yeah.
So, and Mike agreed with that. So that was an interesting thing. And I think, so I would say that, but I totally agree with you, Eric. If you're a coach or you're interested in bodybuilding or you want to understand it, hard to do so without doing it. But if you were to read this meta-ethnography, I think you would have an accurate perspective on a high level of what the day-to-day life is of being a competitive bodybuilder and what it's like navigating your workspace, navigating familiar relationships, navigating personal relationships with a significant other, and then navigating your own decision-making and career trajectory and how long are you going to stay in the sport and the challenges that you face doing the things that are quote-unquote normal in life and then quote-unquote normal in prep. So I'm going to go over it on a kind of a high level to give you the key hits because I'm not going to go through all these quotes or anything like that. But they essentially got down to a framework that described three things: who I am, what I do, and then what I get from it. So the motivations, the gaining of a new identity, and then what they call the decisional balance, how they decide to stay in it. And there's some really interesting things that, like I said, were found across all these different qualitative studies. And they had like 20 studies that were included, all these various interviews. So for the kind of motivations, the who I am side of bodybuilding, they found that it was a convergence of personality traits, situational factors, which makes sense. That's true of kind of who anybody is. But then motivated by a desire for self-discovery and self-improvement, right? So the personality traits, they're exactly what you'd expect. A bit of obsessiveness, a bit of extremity, a desire for perfectionism, and then being very disciplined and committed. That describes every bodybuilder I've ever met. The situational factors really comes down to a number of things, but a lot of them were prior athletes. So it's people who then later in adult life, whether due to prior injury or just the sport they had doesn't really have like a rec league or something like that, or they weren't competitive after a certain level, they wanted to find a competitive outlet. But the by chance social encounter of running into a bodybuilder. Because you first think, oh, you want to compete. Why would you choose to get in a Speedo on stage? Why don't you go play rec basketball? Or why don't you go to a bowling league? It's like anything makes more sense than bodybuilding. So what typically happens is they get exposed to a bodybuilder and they're often an athlete who maybe lifted weights for sport. And then there you go. And then they find these tangible rewards. I can go win this show. It's an individual sport and I'm kind of focused on myself, which connects to that desire for self-discovery, self-improvement. So it's people who are looking for agency, they're looking for control, they're looking for purpose. And often there's not just this positive thing they're striving for. And I do wonder if this is maybe a little different between the enhanced and natural community, because I didn't relate to this part as much. An unwanted self, had a desire to change their physique, almost coming from a negative place. That absolutely does happen in the natural community. But run into a lot more people who maybe frame that more as an approach goal rather than an avoidance goal. I'll put it that way in the natural community, just based upon my experiences, which is, my N of 1 experience. So that could be something different. But anyway, that's the who I am. And then there's this desire for control as they move into this new identity of competition, and they have to justify what they're doing, which requires a high level of control. And they face risks, they face challenges in going through these practices that enable them to be a competitive bodybuilder. So everything I don't think I need to go through everything a bodybuilder has to do. So highly structured and regimented training, eating, and also PED use, which is a big part of this meta-ethnography. Managing, okay, how do I get a source? How do I feel about that in society? Am I going to try to do it in a gray area or illegally? And then how do I justify to others and myself the things I'm doing? When I have to decide whether I want to go out to eat with my significant other, am I going to make sure we go to a specific restaurant? Am I just going to really undereat while I'm there? Am I going to bring Tupperware? Am I going to hassle the server until they can get me something that is, baked, not fried, no butter, all that stuff? And then how do I deal with the judgments that I get from the people around me, or at least their observations? And then what are the risks and challenges of doing this? Like the disordered eating. This is something that bodybuilders openly talk about. It's not like they're in denial about it and the clinicians are aware of it. This is stuff that is talked about openly in the community. If you've ever been in a bodybuilding space, no, I got too obsessive, or I had binge eating disorder post-show, or I used to have an eating disorder and now I've molded into something more productive, et cetera, et cetera. These types of conversations are very normal. And an interesting thing that happens is that bodybuilders experience unconditional support from their community, typically. I get it. I understand. Yep, that's what you have to do. It's part and parcel of it. And then they typically get conditional support outside of the community. So, it's really awesome that you're working so hard, but I don't approve of your drug use. Or, yeah, that's great, but I don't think you should get so lean. Or when are you going to put some fat back on? Or what about the holidays? Or you're too disconnected. Some of them are valid. I'm not saying that this lack of support from outside of the community isn't warranted. It's understandable, if someone is being very unbalanced in their approach. But every competitor typically experiences, at least at one time or another, a different type of support from people within versus without their community. And that's something they're dealing with. And then the final piece, that was a description of the what I do after who I am. The final thing they talked about is what do I get from it? Because as you move through this meta-ethnography, I think a reasonable person who's not a bodybuilder would ask, God, why are these people doing this? What do they get from it? And I think this is something that was relatively not well reported. Go find the
trophies in my shed and then ask me again,
Yeah, you take a look at that Niels Anderson trophy. That guy's more jacked than me.
You tell me what I'm getting from it. Look at the trophy case. That's
right.
Blue bin in my shed.
Exactly.
Disassembled in pieces.
Absolutely. It's the hardware, baby. And always small enough shows the amateur level that you're pretty much guaranteed to get something if you just enter enough divisions, right?
Yeah, and some of the trophies are truly preposterous. Like I have like a 3-tiered trophy that has like a gladiator on the top tier of it. I literally had to disassemble it because I was like, where am I going to put this? It's like 3.5 feet tall.
I love them, man. I love the trophies. I think it's cool. But yeah, I think it would be very, you're being facetious, but it's like, if all you're getting is a trophy, why would you ever do this, right?
Yeah.
So this is, I think, where the research is relatively weak, and why I think this meta-ethnography was important, because it was able to answer this, or paint a better picture of this by looking across multiple studies. And they identified a lot of positive reinforcement of self-identity and building self-efficacy, the idea of the benefits outweighing the costs. Now, that is an important point, though. It was always framed that way. So that, I go through this crucible, and on the other side of it, I get something very positive from it. So, people were talking about feeling more autonomy, the ability to shape their own world. I would call that agency or self-efficacy. A large increases in self-belief, self-confidence, The framing of going, look, if I was able to do that, if I was able to get to that contest prep, I can do anything. Also, a very common element of like it being a therapeutic experience, that they're able to get personal growth and work through emotional issues. Like I was mentioning earlier, even people with a history of disordered eating, they might feel that they're being controlled by the eating disorder or the disordered eating pattern, and then through bodybuilding, they're controlling it. I mean, even when bodybuilding is a little more pathological, it is better than having like anorexia. I'm not saying this is an outcome one should follow, but this is a conversation you will hear. I used to always try to make myself smaller, and now I'm trying to make myself bigger, except for prep, and then I'm trying to get leaner, but it is a different framing of the mind, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and people talk about increasing their coping ability, finding psychological refuge in the process, alleviating stress, believe it or not. But yeah, those are all things that are more or less universally described across bodybuilders, and I 100% relate to all of it. Now, the other aspect of that is, when do the costs outweigh the benefits? And that is something absolutely talked about. And so, for example, with this increase in self-belief and self-confidence and self-sufficiency, sometimes comes a very narrowed identity. They find that they get so obsessed with bodybuilding, maybe some of those personality traits, and only getting from support from inside the community, that they start to lose connection with other aspects of their life. All they find they can think about, do, or be is a bodybuilder. And that sometimes pushes people out of the sport. And there is a lot of people who cease participation in the sport. And that's something I really do want to mention, is that this is not a quantitative study that does a random sample and has a control group. We are absolutely going to be potentially looking at survivorship bias here. Anyone who's getting interviewed and the inclusion criteria for that interview is you're a competitive bodybuilder, the closest thing to not surviving is they're considering stopping, but there's going to be a bunch of people who wouldn't participate because they no longer self-identify as bodybuilders. And I can't quantify how many people are chewed up and spit out by the sport or quit, but I could say that it's a lot of people. I don't know if you would agree with that, Eric.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that's something to consider, is that it's not like, oh, you're going to get positives and benefits out of this. You might just get a bunch of, negatives and positives out of this. You might just get some negatives and say, this isn't for me, I'm out. Or the negatives immediately outweigh the positives, and it kind of leaves you worse for wear. I've definitely seen it.
Yeah, I've seen, I remember, I got into fitness and I saw that someone from my old high school, I saw on Facebook, someone who was never on sports teams, it was never into athletic stuff. All of a sudden, this person got really into fitness. And this is before, I think that's more common now with Instagram kind of blowing up, but this was in the pre-Instagram years. And so this person got really into fitness, and they were clearly getting ready for either a bikini or a figure show. I think bikini. And, they did it, and they got in really good shape for it. But that person, you could tell just by kind of following their trajectory, clearly became totally disillusioned with fitness. And I don't think they exercised really after that point. I think they're like, this was terrible. This was not a good thing for me. And I think that's unfortunate. It reinforces what you're talking about with survivorship bias. And I think it also reinforces kind of why I said earlier, I don't think folks should take physique preparation coaching lightly. I don't think you should say, well, I'm a pretty good personal trainer, I'm sure I can figure it out. It can be a really challenging thing to guide somebody through that. And if you are not approaching it in a way that prepares that person for all of the ups and downs of competition and recovery, you could, with all the best intentions of the world, be the person who kind of leads them down that road where their first introduction into competitive physique sport is a very unpleasant experience, and ultimately turns them off of a fitness, a lifestyle in fitness that would have continued on for the rest of their life. It could be something that really pushes them away from fitness and ultimately has a really negative impact.
Oh, well said. 100% agree. And yeah, that's exactly what you can get that sense of why when you read this meta-ethnography.
Yeah.
to kind of capstone that, the only part that I really did not relate to, kind of like, that moment at the end of the episode we had with Mike Israetel, where he started talking about the impacts of drug use and why he doesn't really want to go past 42. And I'm thinking, like, I'll compete in the 80 plus class if I'm still kicking, is the costs that are associated with that, and that is something that it was heavily discussed, the costs of PED use and whether they can cease it, but does that prevent them from, going further in the sport? And that's going to conflict with their desire to progress and have agency and all that. So yeah, a lot of the concessions that they make physically and psychologically with taking drugs that have some pretty substantial side effects, because they're also taking them at very high dosages, and a lot of them have never been actually studied in humans, and they're being stacked, that was a big part of this. And that's something that obviously is different between natural bodybuilders and enhanced bodybuilders. So that was something I think it was interesting to read about, but certainly I couldn't relate to it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so hopefully people will check out that article and get a little extra insight into what the life of a bodybuilder looks like, and hopefully people will read your review of the study in the Mass Research Review. I think you did a fantastic job with that. So if you're a Mass subscriber, you have that to look forward to on December 1st. And if you're not a Mass subscriber, hey, you could become one.
That's right.
How's that for an idea?
That's right. You got a few more days to do so at what is our lowest price, that ever happens. So, Eric, we had discussed about doing another research bite, but I'm also recognizing that I did a lot of blabbing about WNBF Worlds and the study. What are you thinking? Is it maybe should we save that one, or do you want to jump in?
I can do a brief one. I can give a little concise overview, because I think this is a question on a lot of people's minds, and I think this is the type of study that you could do the long version, and maybe we will someday, but I think the short version kind of cuts to the chase and gets people the answer that they're looking for. So I think it would be worthwhile to do it. And I assume that you're simply throwing me a one of those lifesavers as I drown in the water. I am an introvert by nature, and I have been podcasting for approximately 4 hours straight. So I appreciate the act of mercy, but I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm enjoying the conversation with you.
I you know what? I figured coming off of the Mass office hours with Brad and Lauren, and then me waxing poetic about multiple things, that you might be ready to tap out, but I am pleasantly surprised and honored that you're ready to keep rocking, and I would love to keep chatting with you, Dr. Trexler.
Yeah, I took a brief nap with my cat this afternoon, so I'm totally recharged. Nothing like a purring cat to kind of ease you to a nice little afternoon siesta.
Yeah, if you got a literal cat nap in, then you go for it.
Yeah. All right. So the reason I think we can do this really briefly is because the question needs no introduction. Dr. Helms, I'm going to lose some weight. I'm going to lose 20 pounds of weight. Sounds good. But how much of that is going to be muscle? I mean, we get this question all the time in the fitness world. And usually people will use a rule of thumb. And I think typically, correct me if I'm wrong, Helms, but I think usually the kind of heuristic that people go with is about 20%. Sometimes people say 25% of the weight that you lose. I think usually 20% is the number that people like. No, 25% is the really common heuristic. So a quarter of the weight that you lose is going to be lean mass or fat-free mass, and 3/4 of it is going to be fat mass. Now, you could go through the literature and try to find some justification for that. I won't say that it's not, I'm not going to say that it's completely detached from evidence, but there's not like a super robust body of literature indicating that this is the magic ratio that occurs in nature, where if you lose, 10 pounds, 2.5 of it is going to be fat-free mass and 7.5 is going to be fat mass. It seems to just be a number that roughly kind of approximates it pretty well. But there's a couple issues with that. First of all, like I said, that number is not super empirically derived. It's kind of just it seems good. So that's one challenge. Another kind of shortcoming of that heuristic, that about a quarter is going to be fat-free mass, is the latter part of that statement. I said fat-free mass, not muscle mass. And there may be instances where you're interested in fat-free mass. So for example, I think it's really fascinating that loss of fat-free mass seems to be a fairly reliable predictor of weight regain after a diet. It seems that the loss of fat-free mass has a kind of disproportionate impact on driving really excessive increases in appetite following a weight loss attempt. So the loss of fat-free mass, in that case, I think it makes sense to be interested in fat-free mass as a broad category, because I don't think we can confidently say that the loss of muscle is really what dictates that response. It very well could be the loss of other, non-muscle tissues like organ mass. So there may be instances where it would be inappropriate to say, I'm only interested in muscle mass. In that case, maybe it is fat-free mass. But for a lot of folks in the fitness world, they want to know about muscle, right? They want to say, how much muscle am I going to lose? Because I don't just want to see my abs at the end of this. I also want to fill out the sleeves of my t-shirt, right? So a lot of folks really want to, they ask this usually because they're worried about losing too much muscle during their weight loss attempt. So there was a new study that looked at this, and the reason I reviewed it in mass is, well, there's a few reasons. First of all, it's a really common question. Second of all, the list of authors here is like an all-star team of body composition researchers. But third of all, they actually looked at muscle. They used MRI, a gold standard measurement, to look at muscle rather than just vaguely looking at fat-free mass. So really, I would say this study, which is brand new, is kind of the best look that we've got at this really common question in fitness. Now, like I said, the list of authors here, it's an all-star team. We've got Stephen Hamesfield. We've got Corby Martin. We've got Leanne Redman. We've got Eric Ravusin. We've got Manfred Muller, Anja Bozy-Westphal. I mean, give me a break. If you've studied the body comp literature, then you're nodding the way Helms is right now. If these numbers don't ring a bell, you need to change your reading habits because these folks are doing some of the best research in the game. Anyway, so what they were doing is this is a collaborative study, and what they wanted to do was model the relationship between skeletal muscle and kind of total body mass. So basically, they created these models where BMI was on the x-axis and skeletal muscle index, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's like the BMI version of skeletal muscle. So instead of total weight divided by height squared, I think it was just total skeletal muscle mass divided by height squared. So
not even FFMI, it's skeletal muscle mass MI.
Correct. Yeah. So they're looking at this relationship, plotting it out between skeletal muscle and body mass. Skeletal muscle index relative to height, and body mass index again relative to height. So they took this big sample and kind of modeled this relationship. And their hypothesis was that you would form this kind of straight line that indicates this relationship between skeletal muscle and total body mass, and that as you're losing weight and your BMI is kind of going left on the x-axis, you're basically just sliding down this regression line. And so that they could predict, okay, well, you lost 20 pounds. We know how that will affect your BMI. How would we predict that that would therefore affect your skeletal muscle index? So you can use all these things to calculate how much weight would be lost as specifically skeletal muscle for a given magnitude of weight loss. So conceptually, it's elegant in its simplicity, a very, very simple kind of intuitive model. And the approach that they took was they got a huge group of, they kind of pooled data from multiple studies where they assessed body composition using MRI. So they had data from almost 900 individuals with MRI measurements. So they could get a really good kind of basic idea of this relationship between skeletal muscle index and body mass index. So about 900 individuals had their data included for developing this predictive model. Step 2 of it was then to actually put that model to the test. So what they did was they combined data from 2 studies, 2 weight loss studies, where again, they used MRI for body composition measurements. And they looked at these weight loss studies. One of them was about 12 to 14 weeks in duration and had 74 participants. The other one was about 12 months in duration and it had 26 participants. So you're looking at weight loss occurring over 2 very different timescales. which I think is kind of a strength of this study. In both of these studies, people were generally aiming to lose and succeeded in losing about 10 kilograms, give or take, usually between 8 to 12 kilograms. So this is meaningful weight loss happening over a variety of different time courses. And the idea was they make this big predictive model with a ton of data, and then they want to see how well the predictions actually pan out when they compare it to real weight loss data in these two smaller studies that they combine results from. And so the reason that this list of authors is like an all-star team is because these are the folks who do the high-quality MRI weight loss studies in these incredibly well-outfitted research institutes, and they teamed up to kind of combine their data to look at this question and address it head-on. Now, the long version of the results could be presented. They did find some interesting nuanced findings. They ended up making like 6 or 7 different regression models that you could kind of pick apart and kind of interpret individually. They did notice, for example, that there was, in males specifically, there was an effect of age where they found that younger males, I think, had more precipitous losses in skeletal muscle mass than older males, probably because, when you get to the age of like 70 in an untrained population, there's usually just not a ton of muscle mass at baseline that is going to be lost. I think that really explains why younger folks had larger, steeper drops in skeletal muscle for a given amount of weight loss. So there are some nuanced findings, but I think the most simplified kind of overarching findings can really be broken down by biological sex. So what they found was males could expect, based on the models, based on the longitudinal data, to lose about 20 to 25% of their weight as muscle. Okay, so not fat-free mass, but actual muscle tissue. So the other, 75 to 80% would be non-muscle tissues, which would be a combination of fat and other fat-free mass as well. So 20 to 25% for males would be lost as muscle. For females, it was only about 10 to 15%. That kind of makes sense when you consider baseline muscularity. It kind of makes sense when you look at some of the case reports in, natural physique athletes, although there are some caveats.
Men, at least.
Yeah, there's some confounding variables there when you look at which categories people were competing in and how lean they were trying to get and things like that. But at the end of the day, did I say something wrong? Did you correct me on a term there? What I messed up there? Oh, okay.
No, you're good.
Okay. Like I said, 4 hours in, mine's not working. We'll push forward. But yeah, so interesting, but very intuitive that there was a difference between males and females. And if you wanted to give somebody a super basic answer and they said, Eric, I'm going to try to lose 10 pounds. If you know nothing else about me except that I'm a human being and I'm a male and I'm trying to lose 10 pounds, how much of it will be muscle? I'd say 2.5 pounds. If all I knew was that you were a female human being and you were going to lose 10 pounds, how much would be muscle? Maybe a pound and a half, right? That is the appropriate interpretation of that study. However, that's usually not the case when we're being asked this in a fitness context, because I have more information than I'm a human being, biologically blank, losing X number of pounds. Usually, people are going to say, I'm a male, I'm 28 years old, and I've been lifting for 7 years. And when I'm doing this diet, I'm going to be consuming about 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass. And I'm going to be resistance training 4 times a week, 2 upper body sessions, 2 lower body sessions. You get the idea. There are a lot of factors that are going to meaningfully change this ratio in a big, big, big way. So if it hasn't come through, I think this is a fantastic study. I think the researchers did a tremendous job, but I do fear that some folks may lose some of the context and kind of forget the fact that this study used data from folks that were not trained and were not engaged in a structured exercise program, let alone a structured resistance training program, let alone a structured resistance training program in combination with high protein intake. And so we have to put major caveats on the way that we interpret these findings. This is the best answer that you could possibly give in the general sense, but we probably need to do better than the general sense when we're trying to like help a client or estimate our own trajectory in terms of changes in lean mass. So the reality is, when we're thinking about changes in muscle mass or fat-free mass, if you're someone who's relatively new to lifting and you're doing resistance training and you're eating plenty of protein and you've got plenty of body fat to lose and you're taking your time with that fat loss, you may very well gain muscle during your weight loss phase. That would not be an unusual or unique finding when we look at the literature. And in fact, there is that paper by Barakat and colleagues looking at recomposition published in the Strength and Conditioning Journal, where they pointed out like, hey, it's not that unusual to see recomposition in folks who actually are like pretty trained and like kind of not shredded, but pretty lean at baseline. It's not all that unusual to observe that in the literature when you have a base of literature that has several hundred participants represented in it, right? So, when people act as though they are essentially doomed to muscle loss no matter what when they endeavor to lose some weight, I think in many cases that's a misunderstanding and a misconception that is really directly fueled by, that heuristic. You'll lose about a quarter of it as fat-free mass. A lot of people apply that heuristic as if it's not actually meaningfully changed by the fact that you're doing resistance training and you're eating plenty of protein, and then we factor in how high your body fat is and your training status. I think that heuristic honestly does more harm than good, if I could be totally direct. Because
I would totally agree, Eric.
Yeah. I think that
it becomes almost fatalistic.
Yeah. And I think a lot of folks have heard it's like once a heuristic like that gets enough recognition and has been kind of repeated enough times, you forget the context of where it came from. And I don't think a lot of the people using that heuristic and repeating it understand that it's derived from studies with no resistance training component whatsoever, to the extent that you can tie it to a body of literature, which is kind of debatable. Now, we do have this new research that I think, frankly, kind of lends some support to that heuristic. I think it's close enough to say, yeah, that heuristic's been doing okay, particularly for males, But again, this has the same shortcoming of, now we can say, yes, this is an evidence-based heuristic if we turn it down a little bit for females, for female individuals. But on top of that, this, despite the fact that now we have like an actual literature base for it with high quality measurements, it still doesn't address the fact that we need to factor in lifting, adequate protein intake, and all these other things. Helms, you've published research indicating that, being, even assuming that you're lifting weights, having higher protein intake in many cases can actually meaningfully impact the ratio that's being lost as fat-free mass, or the magnitude of fat-free mass loss. So all of that is to say, we now have a slightly more nuanced heuristic that actually looks at muscle instead of fat-free mass. And I think that's very valuable. It allows us to make a better distinction between what we expect in a male versus a female. But we still have to be hyper cautious of recognizing that once we start to individualize this heuristic and we say, okay, we're going to start with the assumption that you're going to lose 20-25% as muscle, but then we have to factor in your training program, your protein intake, your training status, what's your starting body fat, how lean are you trying to get? And all of a sudden, these basic heuristics, they kind of go out the window when we start to realize that the way that you answered the questions that I just kind of brought up there as like individualizing factors, they lead us in completely different directions, where I wouldn't be shocked to see a situation where if you tried to contrive a scenario, you could probably get to the point where it would be very intuitive to assume 50% muscle loss. But you could also get to a spot where you say, negative 15% muscle loss. Like you're going to gain muscle during this weight loss phase. So all of that is to say, I thought this was a really cool study. And it's a really weird place for me to be, because on the one hand, I'm like, oh, wow, cool. We've meaningfully improved that heuristic and it's better. But at the same time, I really hope that people think twice before kind of broadly applying that heuristic in a way that is predictive in nature without considering those other factors, which to me, it's like, You just have to consider those factors. They're far too impactful to say, I'll go with a heuristic and just ignore all the details.
Yeah, I think if one was to use this heuristic, the primary way to do it is to have it be the 1-2 punch of selling resistance training.
Yeah.
You go, yeah, someone comes to you, you're a personal trainer or it's a family member, someone not in our community, right? Because you're not going to have to sell resistance training to anyone who listens to Iron Culture. And they say, hey, you, my family member friend who's a personal trainer or is doing a bachelor's degree or it's just muscular and knows about this stuff, and I talk to you about it every time we see each other in November or December, coming up on the holidays, it's a perfect time to have this conversation. I'm gaining a little bit of fat. I want to cut it. Do you think I'm going to lose any muscle? You could say, yeah, if you do your typical approach, Aunt John, Uncle John, Aunt Jill, you're probably going to lose about, 15, 20%, 25% maybe of that as muscle. However, I've got something to sell you, and that's resistance training. And you could cut that all the way down to actually putting on 10 pounds while you're losing 30 pounds over the next year or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the only time that heuristic is really useful because there's so many other dependent variables going on here that are going to impact one another that I think you framed up very well. And yeah, it's almost not a useful question to ask without it just leading to a whole litany of additional follow-up questions.
Yeah, I guess maybe another way that you could possibly justify using it in a very vague sense is if you wanted to kind of convince yourself, or I guess, test the counterfactual. What if I didn't lift? So like maybe if you said like, okay, yeah, maybe I do feel like maybe I lost a little bit muscle, but hey, it wasn't 25% of the weight that I just lost. Like, I guess maybe you could use that to try to like very vaguely approximate how well you're doing on the lifting side during a weight loss phase. But it's kind of like, it's almost just like convincing yourself like, I haven't been wasting my time in the gym. I don't think you can really do anything quantitatively useful with that other than like, if you notice that you're just absolutely shedding muscle during a weight loss phase, perhaps you could say, it seems like my resistance training and protein approach that I'm taking isn't really pushing me that far off from what I would predict if I was doing none of this at all. Maybe I need a better training program and I need to eat more protein. Like, I guess maybe you could use it in that context, but even that's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, as you say that, I noticed that the people concerned with this are typically there's a number of co-varying issues that I notice when I observe these conversations. The people asking and answering this question are typically more likely to do something like a protein modified fast.
Yeah.
They're also typically more likely to therefore also do maybe only a 2 or 3 day per week minimalist training approach and cite the research that is, again, not directly applicable to this on the least amount I need to do to maintain adaptations, because you can't possibly gain muscle on a deficit. And if all we're trying to do is maintain it, then what's the minimum maintenance dose? And I think if you were to take that approach of doing a fast weight loss diet, high in protein, minimal weight training of a low volume, all simultaneously, you are basically accelerating lean mass losses as much as you can while still lifting weights, consuming a high protein. It's like you've ticked all the boxes, but in the least efficacious way possible.
Yeah.
And I notice this happens in people who are really, really focused on the fat loss side, and they don't want to take, this isn't a good idea for an answer.
Yeah.
They want to find what's the evidence-based way to do something that's essentially inadvisable, which is try to lose fat too fast because they're impatient.
Yeah.
Or they want it off, or they do this cyclically. And it leads them to select a certain number of interpretations, which I think a fair number of them are wrong. First, I would say that if I could choose to diet fast on a high protein diet or slow on a moderate protein diet, which horse would I bet on is losing less lean mass? Slower diet every single time. And that's something I pointed out in everything I've ever written about the efficacy of a high protein diet. When you actually just look at data, when you just drop calories and put people into a state of red S immediately, regardless of their high protein intake, that can only go so far. But dieting slower has a marked impact on the ability to recomp versus just maintain or actually lose muscle mass.
Yeah.
And even more than that, just the presence of training. You know, if you take people on these 800-calorie liquid diets on 1 gram per kilogram, like the medically supervised terrible diets, just lifting can almost most of the time eliminate, if not sometimes result in gain. So in order of priority, it's lift weights progressively in the most effective the most effective manner possible, because the same mechanisms which produce hypertrophy are those which combat atrophy, because it is just this, it's like an account. You don't treat your finances differently when you're in a phase where you're spending or you're getting a net gain. You're making money, you're spending money. And if you're spending more than you're making, you're losing money, but you're still collecting a paycheck. And that is what your resistance training is doing. It's a primarily anabolic, not anti-catabolic signal. And it is just offsetting things, right? So the most effective program that you can recover from, which does change from a hypertrophy perspective, is your number one tool. And then the second most important tool is not dieting too fast. And then a distant third, if you look at actual effect sizes, it's consuming a sufficient amount of protein. So when people just focus on the protein side of it and then kind of get it twisted and think of resistance training as an anti-catabolic stimulus rather than an anabolic stimulus, which will proportionally help preserve muscle mass, that's when they kind of find themselves in the suboptimal place. And it all comes down to the fact that they're far too focused on the fat mass loss component of body composition change, forgetting that the largest visual changes are going to happen when you can preserve muscle or even gain muscle and fat mass is neutral or going down. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but that's just something I've noticed of when these conversations happen, they tend to be in that kind of ecosystem of misconceptions or misinterpretations.
Yeah. And I've even seen people who push that even a little bit further and they say, yeah, I'm doing this protein sparing modified fast, but why am I wasting all these calories on non-essential amino acids? Shouldn't I just be like having a few essential amino acid shakes a day? I mean, I could cut my calories in half. Which, yeah, I mean, sometimes people really want to push the envelope and, people want to get an evidence-based answer for what does it look like when I do minimalistic resistance training on a protein-sparing modified fast that's made up of mostly essential amino acid shakes. And it's like, dude, you're in uncharted territory there. Like we don't have the study on that. And it doesn't sound fun. And I think that you can take all the essential amino acid supplements you want, but the fact is you have a major mismatch of energy there, and that's probably not going to be great for retaining muscle.
Well said. Often, evidence-based answers are us trying to figure out the best way to do something, not the best way to do something inadvisable. It's already worst.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. All right, man. Well, that's all I got for you.
Well, that was great. No, we covered a lot, and we're not going to plug the Black Friday sale again. 3 times would be too much. Would you agree with that, Eric?
Yeah, I wouldn't bring up the fact that the sale is going on and that ends about midnight, November 29th, Eastern time, 11:59 on Wednesday, November 29th. I feel like people already know it.
Yeah, if we pushed it again, it would be too much. So, I mean, and also the people who are with us at this point, they're all already the loyal people who I'm sure have taken advantage of it. And it might even feel guilty thinking that they hadn't. And don't need to be reminded that they got just another 48 hours.
And especially when it's the lowest prices that we'll ever do.
Yeah. Just by the fact that they are low and people, they check the website regularly, they're on our Instagram, they're going to see that. They don't need to be reminded of that either. So anyway, 2 times, that's all we're going to do regarding the Black Friday sale. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in. I've really enjoyed this. And, the only thing that we are not getting right, folks, and we will correct it, is how do we start these episodes when we don't have Omar there to say Eric? But we're going to correct that. We're going to figure it out. Until then, let me just say that we do appreciate you listening. And if you could do us one additional favor, is give us a rating, give us a review. You have autonomy, or at least you have been led to believe that. And often when we do these ratings or reviews, or we see people do them, there's a consistent observation of seeing 5 stars or something close to that. So if you're a little confused as to what to put, that'd be my recommendation, just based upon my populist belief systems.
And I think they also, 5 is usually like this universal placeholder. If you don't know what to put 5, come back to it later, or don't.
Yeah, just like the epic rap group, the Loonies, said, you don't know what you have on it? You got 5 on it, okay? So throw back to California, throw back to the 90s, put 5 on it for iron culture. Those who get the reference get it. Those who don't, that's okay. And yeah, we're going to see you in that next episode. Every single insert date here. Until next time, we'll catch you.